Here on Let's Talk with Tiffany Bacon. Thank you so much again for joining me. Today is going to be an awesome conversation about how to help children manage grief. We often have the conversation about how we deal with grief, but we overlook how the children deal with grief. So we're not going to overlook it, not today. Joining me via the phone is my offsite producer and friend to the show, Mr. Donovan West. Hey, Donovan. Oh, hopefully we can get you up on here so we can hear you good. Hold on. Hey, Donovan, can you hear us?
Oh, I can hear you. How are you doing today?
Awesome. So he is joining us via the phone, and we have some special guests in studio. You started to hear from the ladies a little while ago. I'm trying to do too many things. So I'm trying to adjust this so that the live stream people, I might need y'all to hold this so y'all can put it on yourselves. That would be great. We have the ladies here from the Uplift Center for Grieving Children. They are here in studio to tell us about this organization, and I am very thankful that you guys are here to tell us about what you're doing. Welcome. We have Joy Mosely and Katherine Streit so far in studio. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you so much. Good morning. We're thrilled to be here with you.
Awesome sauce. So please just give us a little bit of background on you and what you do at Uplift.
Absolutely. So Uplift Center for Grieving Children is actually the new name of an organization that was called the Center for Grieving Children up until about a year and a half ago, in the fall of 2018. We became Uplift Center for Grieving Children. And so originally we actually started as the bereavement program at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children. And then 20 years ago, in 2000, we became an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization. And so 2020 is actually a really big year for us because we're celebrating our 20th anniversry. Serving children and supporting them as they grow through their grief.
Wonderful.
So we have sort of 4 primary programs for our youth who are grieving a significant death in their lives. We have our family services programs, which are after school and evening groups for young people ages 5 to 18 and their caregivers. So we have 6 sites around the city where we provide these evening groups. They run from September to June every other week.
Wow.
And children are grouped based on age and developmental level. There's a couple really awesome things about this program. One of them is that when the children are meeting in their group, their caregivers, so parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, foster parents, resource parents, whoever is in charge of that child in that time, has their own support group in a different room.
Oh, wow.
All of our services for families and children are completely free. We do not ask for any insurance information. And many of our families also choose to supplement it with individual therapy as well.
Wow.
Another thing I want to make really clear about our work is that we do not provide individual therapy.
We
know it's very important and really necessary for many of our young people. However, we often refer out for those services. And we really take the approach of just providing a peer support group. Because the isolation that we feel in grief, particularly that children feel, can be so paramount. And so we really want to help them understand that they're not alone and that they don't have to grieve alone.
Wow.
So those 6 sites that we have new ones in North Philadelphia at the Lenfest Center, in Center City in Rittenhouse Square. We have them in our main offices in East Falls on Henry Avenue. We have them in West Philadelphia at the Chop Carabots building at 48th and Market. We have them in the lower Northeast, which is at Large and Roosevelt Boulevard. And then lastly, we also have them in South Philadelphia at the Tasker Morris Broad Street line stop in the Chop Primary Care / Free Library building.
Right.
So if anybody was interested in getting registered, we have 3 cycles. They start in September, January, and March. And so new families come then because it's really important to us that we are not a drop-in center. We really want to establish a cohesive, consistent group members, both for the young people as well as for their caregivers. We're really blessed that at this time, after a family finishes one cycle with us, they can stay for as many subsequent cycles as they feel that they need. So we're really lucky that we can do that at this time.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from Joy. All right. So clearly I'm doing too much. So yes, if you can face that towards you so we can see your wonderful face. Joy, tell us a little bit more about.
So I'm Joy Mosely, and I am the substance abuse focused school and community clinician at Uplift Center for Grieving Children. I've been there since the end of September, the beginning of October. And the way I learned about Uplift is when I was a school counselor at a former school. Our supervisor, Megan, was actually the clinician who came in to do the grief groups. And it started because I had male students coming into my office a couple times a week just crying. And, that's different. You don't usually get a lot of male students crying. Kids crying because they were losing their friends. And it was becoming frustrating, overwhelming. They didn't know what to do, and I was overwhelmed because I was one counselor trying to do a lot of things. So I went to my director, and she said, "Joy, whatever you can find." So the next day there was information about Uplift on my desk. I called them, and we had a beautiful partnership. Megan came out for, I think, about 2 years, and I really saw just the difference it made in the students. Like, we're not miracle workers, but we provide just a safe environment and a healthy environment for students to come to process their grief. Because sometimes, young people, we tell them, when I was little, I used to say, I got a headache or I'm tired. My grandmother would say, why you got a headache? Why are you tired? Do you work? Do you do this? And so sometimes we don't realize that young people, especially our young people these days, are going through a lot of challenges, primarily a lot of grief because there's a lot of death. And what Uplift seeks to do is just provide a safe space where they can come and process their grief, because even at home sometimes they can't talk about their grief because they know they're going to upset their mom, their dad, their aunties, their uncles, or whomever. They're not allowed to discuss it. And we have a lot of young people walking around with internal grief. They're dealing with it on the inside, and that stuff has to come out. And a lot of times it does not come out in a positive way.
Right.
So in our groups, we try to teach them safe ways to handle their big feelings, and just, again, a healthy and safe environment where they can process their grief.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have another, before Donovan, I want to give you an opportunity to ask a question, make a comment, but we have another guest in studio. Hi, please introduce yourself to us.
Hi, I am Michelle Gonzalez. I am the bilingual school and services clinician at Uplift.
Awesome.
I'm very happy to be here. I just started in early September, and I co-facilitate groups with the interns that we also have at Uplift, and I do Spanish-speaking groups. So being able to provide that type of care, because language could be such an obstacle, being able to provide such a care for these students in order to make them feel comfortable, in order to make them feel more at home, has been a very profound experience. I've felt being at Uplift, just like Katherine and Joy were sharing. Grief can be very, very messy. Yeah. It's very complicated. It's a journey. And knowing that they're not isolated and that they're together as a peer support group has been very, very important for them. And able to integrate with their culture as well when they walk into the room. And that is very, very important.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Donovan, do you have any questions, comments?
Well, first I want to say congratulations on 20 years. That's really an amazing feat, and also more importantly, your expansion, right? It's one thing to exist for 20 years, but it's another when you're growing, and so congratulations to you for that. One thing that I definitely wanted to ask you is that, can you tell us a little bit more about that cohort model and what someone would experience during that period of time?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question one more time?
Can you tell us more about the cohort model? Like, you mentioned how they start a certain time, right? And they'll go through a process, and then, of course, they can come back again in the future. But can you tell us more about what that person or persons would experience during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the programs that I was describing a couple of minutes ago, those are our family services programs, and that's actually only one part of all that we do. We also provide in-school grief groups, as Joy and Michelle were describing, and so we're going to have about 150 schools in the city of Philadelphia each year. We're in private schools sometimes, but primarily the school district of Philadelphia schools and many charter schools, since we know that almost half of the students in Philadelphia attend charter schools as well. And so these are a really great opportunity to really meet the youth where they are at physically and emotionally. And we know that many families experience barriers to get to those after-school programs. So during the times of our grief group, we do a lot of activities with our young people, and we really have the approach that young people process through play. And so adults often really get a lot out of sitting around and talking, but that's not always how young people's brains work, right? And so it's really normal and really common for kids who are grieving a death to be really excited and playing and, like roughhousing with their friends 1 minute, and then being in the depths of their sorrow and crying 5 minutes later. That's actually really normal. There's nothing at all wrong with that. And so we try to take the approach of play is the language of childhood in our groups. So we talk about our feelings. We talk about how we don't have any bad feelings. There's no such thing as a good or bad feeling, only safe and unsafe choices. We talk about coping skills. So what Joy was saying around how we handle these really big feelings. We talk about the fact that grief doesn't end, right? And so as my colleagues were describing, grief is a journey. It's not going to end, right? There are some things that can't be fixed. They can only be carried. And so we really take the approach with our young people of you're allowed to grieve your people or your person for the rest of your life. You do not have to get over it. You can ignore people who tell you that you should be over it. And it's going to be unique and different for each one of us. And so I might be feeling different emotions in my grief than Joy or Michelle might be. And that's okay. It doesn't mean one of us is doing grief better or worse. And I think we really try to help our young people understand that, because so much of the time youth and childhood is about conformity. And we really want our young people to understand that in group, just because you're different, it doesn't mean that you're weird or that something is wrong with you. We do a lot around memorializing. We talk about memories. We talk about continuing bonds. How do we stay connected to our people who died? Just because our person has died doesn't mean our relationship with them is gone. And how to really stay connected to them. Maybe that's through art or writing or talking to them in our heads or out loud or sharing memories. What are our linking objects in our home that make us feel close to them? What are the linking spaces in our neighborhoods or in our city that remind us of them? And a lot around sharing those things with each other to really make us feel like we can hold on to them and we are allowed to.
Yeah.
And what our new normal looks like now. What does it mean now that I am a grieving kid and I'm still a brother, even if my brother has died? And what those identities sort of evolve and unfold as our grief journey continues.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Any other question, Donovan?
Yeah, so when you talk about, different levels of grieving and how everyone, they grieve individually, can you tell us some more about, I guess, at least making sure how you would ensure someone is going through the actual process versus using, that perspective as a reason for not necessarily progressing through the process of grieving?
So leaning into the grief versus working through the grief. What's that process look like to, actually help them deal with it? Because sometimes people will just say, okay, I'm grieving, and then they'll stay there and just use that as a reason to stay there. How do you help them not stay there?
So we really feel very strongly about the idea that people are ready for grief group when they're ready for grief group. And so there's really no benefit to forcing a child or a caregiver into a grief group if they're not ready for it yet. And sometimes the process of being ready to explore and to dig in and to lean into your grief is going to be really different and unique for each person. And so we really always say it takes as long as it takes. When it comes to feeling stuck, something that we try to distinguish when we're working with professionals and our school partners especially is the idea that there's grief, right? Grief is all the thoughts and feelings and behavior that happen to us after someone dies. But then there's also trauma. And so trauma might happen to a child outside of the death, or it might happen as a result of the death. And so we have something that we might call traumatic grief. And so sometimes we refer to that as complicated grief or complex grief. And that's the idea that we have trauma symptoms around our grief that are really not allowing us to move through the emotions in our grief. And so when that comes up, absolutely, you could still benefit from a grief group if you are ready. But we often make sure that our young people who are experiencing traumatic grief are also in individual therapy. A traumatic grief might happen because the death was very traumatic. So a homicide, a suicide, a substance use or overdose related death, but not necessarily. You could have someone suffering from a long illness, and when they die, our children can still have traumatic grief.
Right.
We can also have a traumatic death and a child not experience traumatic grief if we really bolster resources and provide support around that child.
Okay, good stuff. You ladies talked about what it looks like for the young people, rambunctious playing, but what about the teens? What does that program look like? Because I'm pretty sure there's a lot more to deal with there. You have to deal with the adolescence part of it, the hormones part of it, the natural part, and just how a teen can experience and express that grief. How does that program look?
Well, we do 6-week programs in the schools, and one of the things that I have learned in dealing with teens is that sometimes it can be pretty hard to help them process their grief. As with children might be a little easier. So with teens, you just got to be just a little more, you got to take it a little more slowly, and you have to let them just kind of talk when they're ready. You have to let them process when they're ready, because sometimes teens, if they feel like you're trying to make them do something, you know how teenagers are, they're not going to do it. Yeah. And as Katherine says, sometimes teenagers, they're just not ready. And a lot of times in our groups, we kind of enforce that we want young people there who are ready, not because they were made to do it, because sometimes we get parents, I want them to be in this group, and they come, and because they're not ready, they don't benefit from it. So that's one thing that we want our teens to be ready to process their grief, to be able to talk about it. And another thing that I will say that I do like with my teen groups is sometimes like we have our activities ready that we're supposed to do. Like I'm very activity oriented. Let's do these activities. But sometimes they just want to talk. You know, and as I said earlier, sometimes teenagers are very observant when they're at home, when they're in their communities, and they know where they can talk, where they can't talk, where they can express themselves, where they can't. And a lot of times they are bottling up a lot of feelings. And so in these groups, sometimes we don't even do an activity. We just sit and we talk. And I just let them say things that they probably can't say when they're at home, because if they say this at home, grandmom's going to cry, mom's going to cry, dad's going to get upset, people are going to start yelling. So it's like here, they know that I can talk about my grief. I can say whatever I want. I can cry. I can sit here and say absolutely nothing at all. I can put my head down. I got one group where a young lady just sat with her in a nice comfy chair with her feet up. Just being in that environment, a safe environment, where they can talk about things that maybe in other environments they can't talk about. So that's how I deal with my teens. I kind of like let it flow, because teenagers, they know when you're trying to make them do something.
Yeah, they do.
They know when you're trying to. And it's like, you know, I had one of my students used to say, Miss Joy, why are you always trying to therapize me? You know,
therapize. Okay, all right.
So, I mean, that's a new word.
Yes,
that
that's
I've
all
coined,
right.
You know, but they know when you're trying to make them, if they're not ready, they don't benefit from it. So I just kind of like take my time with them, let them talk when they're ready, let them say what they want to say, how they want to say it. You know, let them talk about how they feel, and that usually is successful. But as Katherine said, in their own time.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're just tuning in, it's Let's Talk with Tiffany Bacon. We are speaking with the ladies of Uplift, the Center for Grieving Children, doing wonderful work in the community. So glad that you guys are here. You're talking about a lot about the work that you do with youth. You mentioned that while they're in group, that there is an adult group, that there's a parents group. So what is happening in the parents group? And do you find that there are any barriers that you have to break down so that the work you're doing with the young people can uphold when they're no longer in the group?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question, and I'm so grateful that you asked it. So just for clarification purposes, our in-school grief groups, we unfortunately don't have a caregiver component because we do them right in the school day, in the school building. We do send caregiver letters home so that families can stay apprised of everything that's going on. And many of the families reach out to us and tell us how grateful they are that their young people are able to get that opportunity in school. For our family services groups, where we do have the caregiver component, we really feel strongly that, again, as Joy and Michelle have said, that caregivers are not required to be there. So I would say we probably have like 97% participation, but there are a couple of caregivers who either feel like they're not ready or they just sort of identify as not being a support group kind of person and they get therapy outside of us.
Gotcha.
And we really want to respect that. So in our caregiver groups, we do provide some sort of semi-structure. I think it's really important for caregivers to feel like they have space that's judgment-free. But we also provide some psychoeducation around what a grieving child looks like and how can we support them in a way that's effective. How can we support ourselves? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we manage the changing dynamics in our family system? And so if a caregiver has died, now we have a single caregiver raising the children by themselves. If a caregiver has died and now we have a grandparent raising the children by themselves, this sort of idea of sudden caregivership is something a lot of our caregivers can identify with. Some of our caregivers have lost children of their own. And what does that look like in terms of them grappling with their grief while also making space for their children to talk about that person as well? So we do try to provide psychoeducation around what all of that looks like. I mean, we have a lot of fun. I think it's really easy to think about grief groups being a really depressing, devastating space. And certainly our groups, absolutely, we are safe to have any kind of emotion we need to. But I think in every group there is also some laughter. You know, our caregivers can identify with things with each other that the rest of the world might not understand.
Right.
And so in our caregiver groups recently, we've talked a lot about the death of Kobe Bryant. And so our caregivers really shared that while everybody is grieving Kobe, that loss hits us in a different way when we're already grieving someone else.
Yes, and I did want to ask about how you handle or prepare to handle national events like Kobe Bryant's passing or a school shooting or, you know, something like a 9/11. Thankfully, you know, that hasn't happened. But how do you handle that? And do you deploy like in an emergency situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have supportive services if a school in Philadelphia experiences the death of a student or a staff member, but we do not do any deployment of our clinicians sort of regionally or nationally beyond that.
Okay.
So we have been lucky in Philadelphia in that we are able to partner with our schools in the way that meets the needs of the young people. So as Joy said, we always come prepared with an activity because we know youth learn through play, through movement, through music, through writing, through art. We do a lot of art. But if they really need to process what's happening in the news, what's happening in our greater society, what deaths or tragedies, celebrity deaths, what's happening, we make space for that. And so we have never forced an activity onto anybody. And we feel really strongly that if the kids are coming wanting to talk about something, we drop the activity and we just make the space for that. Because a lot of times there's not that space in our schools because teachers are under so much pressure and stress to get every piece of instruction done to serve their students as best they can. And so sometimes they really just need to talk about it in a safe way.
And awesome. I wanted to mention, Katherine, you said something that made me think. Just because, you know, sometimes people think that a grief group, they don't see their child coming home and they're not talking about it, or maybe they're not saying what's going on, but it doesn't mean that they're not being impacted by it. And it doesn't mean that it's not quote unquote working. I don't want to say working, but it doesn't mean that it's not benefiting them. Sometimes students may come and they may be quiet. They may not say anything, but then at the end we do an evaluation and they say, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm so sorry that group is ending. So just because your child may come home and may not say anything about it, may not talk about it, does not mean that they are not benefiting. So like I talked about previously, I don't make my my young people talk or say anything. Sometimes them just showing up, they show up for the entire 6 weeks means that they're getting something out of coming to the group, something that they may not be getting somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right, because the groups are not mandatory, so it's voluntary. So when they do come, that in itself is a big step. To just come and show up. And especially talking about the teens, having to feel like they are having to keep it all together, especially like what you were saying, like the hormones and like all that stress, and being able to come into a space and talk about things that they don't think they can talk about. Maybe not connect with their friends, or maybe they feel like they're alone in that sense. And being able to expose that vulnerability, that fear that they carry.
Right.
I've seen that when I've been in the high school groups and Spanish-speaking groups and in English-speaking groups. it's such a beautiful thing to remind them that we don't heal in isolation. We heal in
Right.
connection.
Right.
And be able to like reiterate that with them is very, very important.
Right.
And a lot of the students, they actually feel relieved that they have this space. It's like they can come and they can breathe and they can let their hair down. And we do have grief group, we call them grief group agreements. We try not to call them rules because there's so many rules that our students have to abide by. But we just ask them to be respectful. They can always say, I pass if they don't want to speak. And we always make sure they know that what's said in the group stays in the group. But those are our only rules. Other than that, for me, like I said, I just let the group, just let it flow.
Yeah.
And let the students say what they need to say.
Awesome. All right. So listen, we have to take a break. Donovan will give you a chance to ask some more questions. We're also talking to the folks who are watching us on our Facebook live stream. Shout out to everybody who is watching us there. I want to find out from you ladies when we come back from break, with all the work that you do to help these young people and some adults, how do you take care of yourself? You are sitting around grief all the time. How is that not absorbed into your cells and you go home a mess? So we want to talk about your care for yourself and a lot more. Donovan, we're going to hear more from you when we come back after this.
Now back to Let's Talk with Tiffany Bacon.
I hear the people talk.
And a very good morning to you. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. We are in the second half of our program today. Let's talk with me, Tiffany Bacon. We are also streaming live on my Facebook page. Thank you so much for checking it out. I appreciate you. While folks are talking, I'm going to try and find some of the comments that you're making because I can't seem to see it on the actual live stream. I don't know what I did. My settings are crazy. Anyway, so we are here with the ladies of Uplift Children's Center for Grieving Children. They're telling us about the wonderful work that they do. Donovan West is joining us via the telephone. And the question that I asked you ladies right before the break was, with all of this grief that you are consuming by helping other people, how do you take care of yourself? Very important. I don't know who would like to start first, but please share.
What I do personally for self-care after coming home, after not taking everything in like a sponge, because it's very hard not to do that, especially if you have your own grief that's going on. I do a lot of exercise. I surround myself a lot with my family, my friends. I just try to take a deep breath. I try to live like in the present moment, hearing and seeing things that happen throughout our city in Philadelphia. And try to and I really do, it reinforces like how short life really is and how much we have to like really appreciate the moment that's in front of us. And I feel like that this work that I've done, and that I am doing here with Uplift really has helped me a lot in doing that.
Yeah.
I think that's like ultimately like my self-care about it. But it can be tough sometimes to like lose yourself in that.
Yeah.
You know, but once you find that you are losing yourself, to come back is like very, very important.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Next up.
So I think for me, I did not really like learn about like having a self-care plan until I came to Uplift, because I was a school counselor for a long time. Some type of counseling I've done in my career, and I was just used to running, starting from 8 in the morning to 3:30, putting out a lot of fires, crisis, chaos. And I didn't realize until I came to Uplift the burden that was on me, because I really wasn't taking care of myself, and I was taking care of everybody else. I had to have all the answers. And it's crazy because at Uplift, my boss is always like, you know, Joy, you don't always have to have all the answers, because I was the fix-it person.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to a job interview one time, and they were like, so what's your self-care plan? I was like, huh? Like, what is that? So,
right.
So what I like to do, Katherine, so graciously reminded me, is I like to bake. So I often bring in baked goods for work, and I like to craft. I do a lot of crafting. A lot of what else do I do? Sometimes I cook. I like to journal. Sometimes I'll even when I was in grad school and I was tired after class, I would just go out to a movie or something and just sit somewhere and just kind of like veg out
Yeah.
and just not be so consumed with everything. Because I can easily be consumed because I care so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I can easily be consumed with what's going on, and especially in my community where I come from. I've experienced a very significant loss 20 years ago of my grandfather being murdered, and then a family member who was shot and paralyzed for 20 years. He's been paralyzed. So I've dealt with a lot of significant losses and grief. So I understand where the young people are coming from. So I understand that taking care of myself primarily is important, because if I'm not okay, my kids are not okay.
Right.
It comes across when you are doing your groups.
Yeah.
If you are not taking care of yourself. So self-care, for my school counselors out there, my therapists, all of you, self-care is important.
Amen to that. All right. Last but not least.
All right. I was hoping to maybe avoid this question.
No.
So I think something I've learned is that self-care is a practice. It's not something that we figure out how to do and then we're set and we've kind of arrived at this place where we don't need it anymore. It actually is a practice where we have to figure out what works for us. And there are some days we do it really well. And then there are some days where we might overextend ourselves, and then we get up the next day and we try again. And so the idea of it being a practice is so important. I love what Joy just said about the idea that we are often fixers in our personal lives, right? Yeah. And so we're often the people that people come to. And I think even working in grief has taught me that I can't solve another person's problems, but what I can do is just create a space to listen, and I don't have to own those problems like they're my own.
Yeah.
I think I've also learned that self-care is going to be different for each one of us. I think there was a period of time in my life, especially through undergrad and grad school, where you're just kind of surrounded by people all the time. And I don't think I realized that I actually am an introvert. I need time alone to really process everything that's going on, like a long day or a long week, before I really want to surround myself with people that I love. And so I need a lot of time to read. I need a lot of time to meditate. I need, in the warmer months, I really love to get home from work and go outside and read or write in the park, or on the porch and meditate, or just sit and enjoy the outside. And so I think I've learned that I need to prioritize that time for myself, because the world is a loud place, and for people who get restored by time alone, it's something that we have to carve out and be intentional about.
Right.
Because otherwise we'll just be consumed with other people. And I love the people in my life. But I want to be fully present for them, and that means I have to put myself first sometimes.
Right.
And then also monitoring what we take in, because sometimes a lot of us, we get a lot of our information from Facebook, and it can be just a lot of just, the news is on there, and you see just a lot of stories about death upon death upon death, and it gets to be too much. And so sometimes I have to just shut that stuff off, because I deal with it every day, and it can just be, overwhelming, what's going on in politics, and it's just a lot of stuff out there that can really seriously can really drive you, insane. So it's just really monitoring what you're reading, what you're watching, even the conversations you're having. Sometimes I have to stop myself, because I'm the person that's did you hear that story? Did you hear that story? And one day my coworker was he's like, Julie, I can't talk about it. I was like, you know what? Neither can I.
All right. Just let that go.
Let me just chill with that. So just monitoring what you are taking in, because sometimes just that in and of itself can be very overwhelming.
Being able to, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Being able to disconnect and be able to be present, from what Katherine and Joy were saying, is a lot more of a challenge than we really think it is when we actually try to do it, whether it's disconnecting from social media, whether it's disconnecting just from people, though we love being with people all the time, just to have time to yourself, your own solitude, and being comfortable with your own self and your thoughts can be a very scary place as well, but still a very rewarding thing to do.
Right.
And it's something that we have to constantly work on an everyday basis. And I think that we need to put more time into that individually. And I think that's a big part of self-care in itself.
Absolutely.
Especially when you have a job where you talk all day.
Yes.
Where you talk all day. Tiffany. And you're the person that cares for everybody. Sometimes it's good just to go home. And sometimes I'm just I don't really talk on the phone a whole lot. I got maybe a couple people that I talk to. I don't talk on the phone a whole lot because I talk all day. And sometimes I just don't feel like it. And it's okay. It's okay just to not answer the phone and be you know what? I'll call you back, or let's talk about this later. I'll talk to you on the weekends, but even just being okay with just going home and being silent.
Yeah.
You know, and not like Michelle was saying, not being afraid of your own thoughts, and that solitude is important.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Donovan, any questions?
No, I think these are some really great comments, some great responses to that question. And because I think it's really important that everybody understands that, there's different ways to approach it. And, so hearing the variety of different, of responses to, how you may take care of yourself and how important it is, but also understanding, one thing I thought was interesting is that, we should also, take inventory, because the reality is that we all have like emotional minds, and so it may be a particular day, a subject, or something to that effect that actually may hit you harder than normal. And so what do you do in that situation? So just being able to say, you know what, my normal regimen may not be enough, and so maybe I need to do something else or try something else in order to, make sure that I stabilize where I'm at. And then also the other part about, getting counseling yourself, getting someone or someone that you can actually confide in and take off your armor, so to speak, and hopefully that person can be skilled enough to expose what may be a blind spot, right? So that you can remain healthy and also not necessarily take home too much of what you're experiencing in the workplace. So I think that's all great stuff. And one thing I'd also say is, amongst one another, do you find an opportunity to often, regroup and do a wrap up internally as an organization? That was one question that I thought as you guys were providing your comments.
So I know that we have supervision weekly with our supervisor. We meet. I know I meet with mine on once a week every Monday, and I can just talk about whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be about group. It could be about what's going on in my personal life. Like, anything that is affecting me is affecting my work. So just being able to have that hour with my supervisor, just to kind of like just sit and talk about anything. And I just want to just make a plug. What Donovan just said, there's nothing wrong with counseling. There's nothing wrong with therapy. I think a lot of people are suffering because they won't go to counseling. They won't go to therapy. They don't want to open those wounds. They don't want to talk about those things that bother you. And as I said in the beginning, those things will come out, and a lot of times they don't come out in safe and healthy ways. So, if you need to talk to someone, I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to get the counseling and the therapy that you need. I mean, even if you just have a family member or a friend, a trusted person, as we tell our students, a trusted adult, someone that you can trust and you can tell your issues and your problems with, is very important to get those things out, to process your feelings, because they will surface, and we want them to surface in ways that are positive and healthy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Joy. I think something that the clinicians on the team and really the whole organization understands is that each one of us has a personal grief journey, and each one of us has a personal healing journey. And we can't promise anyone that it's ever going to be easy, but it is always going to be worth it. Like Joy said, the freedom that sort of comes as a result of working through that in an intentional way. I feel really blessed and really lucky because there have been, I can't think of a single time where something really difficult happened in my day and I couldn't have called up any one of my colleagues and been like, do you have 5 minutes? I just need to unload this. I think we really rely on each other for support. The clinicians really would drop anything to help each other at any time, even if it's just like, you know what, I have this group tomorrow, and what do you think I should do for it? I feel like we really get so much out of being in community with each other. We try to eat lunch together when we can.
Yes.
We try to gather the organization for a team lunch when we can. We've learned that logistics are challenging, and that's a hard thing to work around. But I think what we're also learning is that we have to prioritize it sometimes.
Yeah.
And whether that is weekly supervision, I feel really lucky that we absolutely make it necessary and mandatory. And that space is for you. Our supervisors are never like, this is what we must talk about today. But I really love the idea that I don't feel isolated in my work. And I think Joy was an outstanding, heroic school counselor. And so many of our school counselors that we partner with, they are often the only social worker the only counselor in the building.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of not having a person or a colleague that you can even just process what happened with, because their colleagues are all educators. And so they have different, very important training, but different.
Yeah.
But we get to leave our schools and come back to each other. And that is just a gift that so many of our colleagues in the rest of the city don't have.
Yeah.
So I just feel extraordinarily lucky that we have each other.
Yeah.
So it sounds like to me, well, with Katherine and what Joy said, I definitely do 100% agree with that. And from what Donovan was explaining, it sounds like when we go into our supervision, we meet weekly with our supervisor. I think that the triggers that we also may become in ourselves with our own grief journey, being able to recognize it and acknowledge it and say, like, hey, listen, like, I went to this grief group. I can call my supervisor at any minute. I can call Katherine or Joy or anybody on our team and say, hey, like, this happened. I felt this way. Whether it's upset, angry, or like nervous or anxious, like, can you just listen to me? Like, can you provide that space for me right now? Just to like get it out of my system so then I can continue to go on to the next school or whatever it is that I need to go next. Being able to do that is such a wonderful experience, and I wish that everyone had that.
Right,
I feel very
right.
lucky as well to do that.
Right.
It's a big part of our, it's a big part of our job and our mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
As counselors.
It helps to prevent burnout. And you guys do so much that we don't need you to burn out. Like, it's so important that you don't burn out. As we approach the last couple of minutes of the program today, please let people know how they can reach out to you, how they can enroll a child into the program. And again, reiterate, like you did in the beginning, for anyone who's just joining us, what schools you're in and just how folks can support what you're doing.
Absolutely. I wish I could list out all the schools that we're in, but we would take probably the next hour of Tiffany's day. So we are in over 150 schools every school year. Certainly we're not in every one of them. But we are in School District of Philadelphia schools, we're in charter schools, we're in almost all of the Mastery charter schools, and other charter networks as well, Catholic schools, and we've partnered with 1 or 2 private schools as well. So if your child is in a school and you want to know if there's a in-school grief group happening, you need to find the school social worker or the school counselor. And typically, if they already have a partnership with us, they'll let you know when in the school year they will have their group so that you can get your child on the list for that grief group. And again, it has to be a significant death, unambiguous loss, so a caregiver incarcerated, a caregiver who's been deported, a caregiver who's lost parental rights. Those are really important losses to process. But unfortunately, kiddos who don't have a significant death are just not eligible for participation in our grief group, just the way our funding works right now. So absolutely, you need to talk to your school counselor, your school social worker, and if they don't have a partnership with us, they can contact us. So they can give us a call, or they can email us. The easiest phone number to call is 267-437-3123. And that's actually the same phone number to get registered and enrolled for our evening family services grief support groups. So right now we're registering families to begin with the March cycle. After probably the middle of April, we would be registering families to begin with us in September because we do have that cycle system. And so it's really important that we only have families join at the beginning of each cycle. So that's how to get in touch with us for our evening groups. If you need to talk to your school counselor, or school social worker, we also do trainings and professional development with any group of professionals who works with children experiencing grief and trauma. So we've done school-wide professional development trainings. We've done trainings for school-based clinicians through the school therapeutic services programs, through CORA, through community behavioral health. So if you are a part of an agency and you really want to enhance your colleagues and your own understanding of grief or trauma, you can definitely contact us, and we would love to do that.
Awesome. With that, I have to say thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Thank you,
Jennifer, Mike Robinson, for making this happen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you, Tiffany. Tiffany was really gracious, and she just gave us the slide at the last minute. She did it quickly, and so Uplift Center for Grieving Children, we say happy birthday.
Thank you.
And we say thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the love. Thank you so much for checking out the show. Donovan, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Awesome sauce. Listen, we're still on the live stream on Facebook for a few more seconds, but for the radio show, we are done for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a peaceful, positive, and productive day. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.